I've played a lot of PS1 games during my life, and there's some good ones and there's some rough ones. Chalk it up to that new era of 3D where people were waiting to see who could be ambitious and who could pull off this new technology. It was definitely an interesting time for sure. Now today I'm going to talk about 10 more PS1 games that you should play, games that are interesting, fun, and just overall enjoyable. Now these aren't the best games on the system, but they deserve a shot at being in your library. Let's begin. In the previous 10 games you should play episode for the PS1, I mentioned Air Combat, which is based on an arcade game from Namco. But what many people don't realize is that Air Combat is technically the first Ace Combat game. I know it's weird, it hopped from Air Combat to Ace Combat, but it is what it is. Now, Air Combat is a game, I adored it. I grew up in the military. I joined when I was 18, and for 11 years, I fixed F-16s. I've only ever known two things: fighter jets and video games. So when I can combine those two and see accurate appearances of those birds of war, that's epic to me. I was stoked for Ace Combat 2, and I was impressed, and I think it's because Namco understood that flight sims with arcade elements could be fun if done correctly. And the designer Masanori Kato wasn't impressed with his initial product for Air Combat, so this was his chance to create exactly what he wanted from a technological standpoint, and that resulted in better graphics, a variety of missions, and what I consider a truly rewarding experience on the PS1. Plot-wise, the game isn't significant, right? But personally, I tend to focus on the flight aspect over the plot, at least this early in the Ace Combat series. Ace Combat still thrives to this day, with the most recent being Ace Combat 7, Skies Unknown, but I didn't really like it. I'm sure I'll explain why someday in another video. Uh-oh, Fort's lost his marbles. He's recommended a Rugrats game. Call the Looney bin! Listen, I play a wide variety of games on a wide spectrum of methods. There's tons of games out there. Some are goofy, some are legendary, some are like passing a kidney stone, but I play them all, and I rate them according to how fun they are, for the demographic they represent. And this game is a wonderful time waster for kids of the era that liked the show. I didn't expect anything perfect. I didn't expect some cutting-edge technology. This was Rugrats. And would you believe me if I said it's a decent game? Because it is. We play as Tommy Pickles from the show, and we're going to find the 11 lost pieces of the Reptar Jigsaw puzzle. Many of the levels are based on actual episodes, and a little trivia fact for you, most of the voice actors from the show lended their voices again for the game. Give it a try. Yeah, it's gimmicky, some might say it's tacky, but it'll be a good time. Let's get back to the serious stuff though. If you've seen my previous episodes of the 10 game series, you might have noticed that I'm not a big fan of the Strider series. The arcade original, it was decent. The NES entry was like watching a crackhead talk to the Sky Council on the corner of Main Street, and the sequel, Strider 2, Roman numeral 2 on the Genesis, was the equivalent of watching your drunk uncle shove a Roman candle up his ass and light it, but he's so shit-faced he forgot that he put it in backwards and now he's the Human Torch. It's a mess, a genuine horrible mess, to me at least. That all changed with Strider 2, number 2, which was released in the arcades, and it was a massive change in the franchise's direction. We use the term glow up when we talk about people changing appearances, right? This is Strider's glow up. We see a refreshed, edgy, and mysterious character that has wonderful animations in a playfield that is exceptionally visually appealing, and the arcade version was ported directly to the PS1. Now, Capcom did do a little bit of a goofy, right? They put the wrong logo on the disc. Seriously, if you have Strider 2, go look at your discs. You'll notice the 2 is missing. Honestly, in my opinion, for what it's worth, this is one of the greatest games on the PS1. It takes place around 2,000 years after the events of the original arcade game, and the Grandmaster makes a return, so it's basically the same plot, but with a major overhaul. The most recent Strider game is 2014 Strider, courtesy of a dual development with Double Helix and Capcom. You'll oftentimes hear me refer to Namco as one of the heavy eight of the arcade transitional era. That group to me is Data East, Capcom, Taito, Atari, Sega, Nintendo, Konami, and Namco. They all had this interweaving competition on making genres pop, and one of the more popular genres were fighting games. Capcom had Street Fighter and Data East had Karate Champ, Atari had Warlords. Basically, all of these companies played a role in fine-tuning the direction of the industry. So where did Namco come into play? Well, they wanted games that were more involving in the combat world. And their two franchises that really stuck were Soul Calibur and Tekken. What made Tekken stand out was that it was more than just punch button, punch opponent. Button mashing bullshit, right? Each button corresponded to a limb, so you could low kick with your right leg, swap out to your left, punch twice with your right arm, and then kick again with a certain leg. It's a wonderful system. It's a true to form combo system, and to me, that's satisfying. Now, I'll be honest with you, Tekken 1, it isn't the prettiest game. In fact, it looks like most of the transitions were created in kid pics. Remember that? The game itself, though, really fun. The plot is simple. Heihachi Mishima wants to see how bouncy his son Kazuya is, so he lobs him off a cliff. Kazuya survives the crash and then decides to make a deal with the devil to become a bouncy, strong punching machine. A lot of time goes by, Heihachi creates the Iron Fist tournament, and holy shit, we have a franchise. Tekken obviously still exists, with Tekken 8 being released earlier this year. Got another fighting game for you. This is actually a guilty pleasure blockbuster rental from my childhood, true story. It was created by Paradox Entertainment, who historically, they really didn't do much, outside of exceptionally gimmicky games like Backyard Wrestling, Simba's Mighty Adventure, and the chronically confusing game that is Wu-Tang Shaolin Style. They also made a game that I hate, Rock'em Sock'em Robots Arena, but somehow, they managed to figure it out with X-Men Mutant Academy. I didn't even expect it to be a fighting game when I was a kid. I just saw X-Men and decided to check it out. And it played a lot like Street Fighter, and it had characters from the X-Men movie from 2000. The one created by David Hayter, Solid Snake. Yeah, that's something you know now. For what it is, it's a simple fighting game, but simple can be good. Not a lot of people enjoy this one, but I do. And I feel that to date, most X-Men games were hit or miss, so this was refreshing to me. Get good! 2 words manifested by the cultural masses that represented the ability of one to cope harder with the difficulties of games, often involving the word souls in it. This is the first game ever, from Software. And while I cannot stand modern From games and the impact it's kind of had on the action-adventure genre as a whole, this was a good game. I was shocked. It's a very simple game too, and what's so interesting about it is that a vast majority of the elements that would be used in later Souls games were kind of manifested here. Quiet and mysterious worlds, characters without much depth, unique music, a sense of dread. It's definitely an experience. Now what sucks is that this game is a Japanese exclusive. In the US, the Kingsfield we received was actually Kingsfield 2, but the good news is there is a translation patch available. Now story-wise, we play as the heir of Gene Alfred Forrester, who's looking for his dad. Along the way, we learn more about the legend of King Reinhardt and Riandolph VIII. Kingsfield did go on for a few more titles. There were 2 expansion-style games or scenario discs, but the most recent true-to-form Kingsfield game was Kingsfield 4. I've yet to play it, but I look forward to checking it out someday. There were a few different compilations for Final Fantasy games. I can think of about 3 off the top of my head, at least for the American PS1 market. I'm sure there are some that I'm missing, but Anthology was very important to me because it has 2 games on it. The first is Final Fantasy V, which if you know anything about Final Fantasy V, it was originally released in Japan exclusively on the Super Famicom. This was our first chance to check it out. The second game is Final Fantasy VI, which did have an American release as Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo. Now I will say these games are known to have atrocious loading times because it's on the PS1, but if you can look past that, you have 2 amazing 2D Final Fantasy games on your PS1, with a bonus special edition soundtrack. Still a cool compilation to have. This is a case of something we see so often in gaming history. If something is culturally relevant, be it a movie, a book, a toy line, if there's any potential to make money on a product or licensed copyright, companies will seek it. LGN made an empire of lies in the 80s and early 90s with their shithole NES games. But one movie game that stood out to me was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. In fact, it was one of 3 PS1 games that I personally owned as a kid. Now, the PS1 game that aligned with the first book in the Harry Potter series was created by Argonaut Games. They were known for Star Fox way back in the day, and they made a few more eccentric games like Croc and Buck Bumble, which both suck. Don't play them. The game is dry. It's drier than a $2 steak, but that's where the charm comes into play. It's silly. The game does align with the events of the first movie, so it's pretty simple and it's very linear. And while I will say that many of you won't like it, I feel personally they didn't do a bad job. It's one of those games that I actually like going back and playing, and letting my kids play. I always heard that this game was great, and I believed it, but I didn't own it. It was rated M, so convincing my dad to let me buy it, not happening, at least not when I was a kid. I couldn't even play T-rated games unless they were Star Wars. In fact, I was 15 before I owned my first M-rated game, and it was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. The only other way I could play them was to con my grandmother in letting me rent them from Blockbuster. But when I was roughly 16, I went to the mall and I bought Snake Eater. That game consumed so much of my life, and in my opinion, it was the perfect game on the PS2. And one day, likely that same year, I went back to the game store with money I earned cutting grass, and I bought the Essentials Collection, which had Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3. Great collection if you ask me. And then I binged them all for a week. Metal Gear Solid was intuitive, it was unsettling in some cases, it was surreal because Hideo Kojima is so eccentric in his storytelling, and speaking of that, you can kind of spot a Hideo Kojima game a mile away. They all tend to feel the same if he has the creative control, and I'm not complaining one bit. Many of the elements from Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake on the MSX, also created by Hideo Kojima, carried over to Metal Gear Solid, as did the plot. Metal Gear Solid takes place 6 years after the events of Metal Gear 2, and it's sort of the third chapter of the Solid Snake saga if you want to consider it that. We play as Solid Snake, we sneak into Shadow Moses Island, trying to find information about Metal Gear Rex, which is a nuclear-capable mecha machine of doom, right? I don't want to get too far into it because this game is a plot-heavy experience. But if you want to have a damn good time on the PS1, this is the way to do it. The most recent Metal Gear Solid is actually a reimagining of Snake Eater known as Metal Gear Delta Snake Eater, and I really want to check it out. I'll be brutally honest with you, when I saw this game, I thought I was in for a rough time, like going for a jog with soggy socks rough time, right? There was just something about the aesthetic of the box art and the fact that it was a DreamWorks game that gave me this false bias that the game was probably not going to be fun, and I was wrong. I was very wrong. I don't think I've been more wrong to judge a game by its cover as I did with Taifu, Wrath of the Tiger. This game is fucking fun. Like, stupid fun. It's a brawler, we play as Taifu, and we go around chaining together all of these cool-ass kung fu moves that we learn in linear levels, with non-stop combat action. The whole story revolves around the sole survivor of the Tiger Clan, with the evil Dragon Master attempting to conquer the realm. Tai goes and seeks out the Dragon Master to avenge his lost clan, all the while learning all of these new moves from various other clans like the Crane Clan, Monkey Clan, Panda Clan, Leopard Clan, etc. And I find one thing very interesting. This game was made by DreamWorks, the same people who would eventually make Kung Fu Panda, many years later. Makes you wonder, huh? And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? Did any of these games bring you joy in your childhood? I'd love to know down below. I do read every comment, and I do respond to every comment, even the mean ones. Also, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already at home with our community. We're a group of folks who enjoy remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live, and I'd personally love to have you here. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.